Everyone in London knew one thing about James Cavendish, the Duke of Ashford. He never looked twice at anyone. Not at the women who angled their smiles toward him at every ball. Not at the mothers who placed their daughters in his path like carefully arranged furniture. Not at the men who laughed too loudly at his jokes, hoping proximity to power might rub off on them like gilding. He looked through people, that was what they said, as if they were glass, as if they were air, and yet. On a Tuesday night in November, on a road outside of London with rain coming down like punishment, the Duke of Ashford stopped his carriage. He didn't have to. No one would have known if he hadn't. The woman on the road was nobody. That was what the world had decided about her, and the world was rarely contradicted. But he stopped. And what happened in the 2 minutes that followed would quietly undo both of them, though neither would admit it for a very long time. The rain had started slowly, the way disasters often do. Clara Voss had left the Hartley house at 7:30 when the sky was merely gray and the wind merely unpleasant. She had refused the carriage. Mrs. Hartley had offered twice, which was once more than Clara had expected, and Clara had declined both times with a smile she had spent years perfecting. Gracious, unbothered, the smile of a woman who had other arrangements. She had no other arrangements. What she had was pride, which was a poor substitute for a roof over one's head but considerably easier to carry. She had walked this road before. It was not so far, and she absolutely would not accept charity from a woman who had spent the entire evening glancing at Clara's gown with that particular expression, the one that sat somewhere between pity and satisfaction. Clara knew that expression well. She had been collecting them for 3 years, ever since her father's fortunes had collapsed with the quiet violence of a building whose foundation had been rotting for decades. One morning they had everything. The next, it seemed, they had the house, the debts inside it and the clothes on their backs, and the clothes were already showing their age. She pulled her shawl tighter and walked faster. The rain, of course, had other plans. By the time she reached the open stretch of road beyond the village, the sky had made its decision. It came down all at once, cold and absolute, the kind of rain that soaks through wool in seconds and finds every gap in one's composure. Clara stopped walking and stood very still for a moment because there was nothing else to do. Running would not help. Cursing would not help. She was wet and she was cold and she was a mile from home, and that was simply what was true. She started walking again. She heard the carriage before she saw it, the particular sound of expensive wheels on a wet road, the heavy rhythm of horses moving at a controlled pace. She stepped to the side without looking up. Carriages passed. That was what they did. That was what people inside carriages did too. They passed and they looked away, and that was the arrangement the world had settled on. The carriage slowed. Clara kept her eyes forward. Perhaps it was stopping for the road, perhaps a wheel. It was nothing to do with her. The door opened. She heard boots on the step, then on the road, footsteps, unhurried, coming toward her. "Miss." A man's voice, low, even unreadable, not unkind but not warm either, the voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed without softening the request. Clara turned. She could not see him clearly. The rain and the darkness conspired against it. She had an impression of height, of dark clothing, of a face that was arranged in an expression she couldn't quite name. He was looking at her with something that wasn't pity. She was almost certain of that. She had become expert at identifying pity, and this wasn't it. He was already removing his coat. "No," Clara said immediately. He paused, just for a moment, as if the word surprised him, as if he was not often told no. "You'll catch your death," he said. "I am perfectly well," Clara said, which was not entirely true but was the only acceptable answer. "Please don't trouble yourself." He looked at her for a moment. The rain was soaking through his jacket now, which seemed not to concern him in the slightest. Then, without another word, he stepped forward and placed the coat around her shoulders. He didn't drape it slowly. He didn't make it a gesture. He simply put it there, efficiently, almost impersonally, the way one might cover something that needed covering. And then he stepped back, and the distance between them was restored. and the strange intimacy of the moment dissolved as quickly as it had appeared. "My carriage can take you wherever you're going," he said. "Thank you," Clara said, "but no." Another pause. She wondered if he would argue. Men like this one, and she could tell, even in the dark, even without a name, that he was very much a certain kind of man, were not always gracious about refusals. He wasn't gracious, but he accepted it. He turned and walked back to the carriage without another word. No farewell. No name offered. The door closed. The carriage moved on and was swallowed by the rain and the dark, and Clara stood alone on the road with a stranger's coat around her shoulders and water still streaming down her face. She stood there for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then she pulled the coat closer. It was warm, extraordinarily warm, the kind of warmth that costs money, and she began walking again. She did not look at the coat until she was home, standing in the narrow hallway with a candle, shivering slightly despite herself. Her father was already asleep. The house was quiet. She held the coat up toward the light. It was beautifully made. Dark wool, impeccably cut, the kind of garment that announced its owner's position without trying to. And there, on the inner lining, so small she almost missed it, a single letter, embroidered in dark thread. Clara stared at it for a long moment. She didn't know what it stood for. A first name, perhaps, a family name, a title. She folded the coat carefully and placed it on the chair by the window. She would find a way to return it. She would ask around quietly. It wouldn't be difficult. A coat this fine belonged to someone who would be noticed. She would return it, and that would be the end of it. She told herself this very firmly as she got into bed. She almost believed it. In the morning, her father came downstairs with an envelope in his hand and an expression she hadn't seen on his face in years. Not quite hope. Lord Voss had become too careful with hope, but something adjacent to it, something cautious. "We've had an invitation," he said. Clara looked up from her tea. "A ball," he continued, setting the envelope on the table. "Rather a grand one by the look of it." He cleared his throat. "From Ashford House." Clara set down her cup very slowly. "The Duke of Ashford is hosting," her father said, still looking at the envelope rather than at her. "I cannot imagine why we've been included, but, well, it would be foolish not to go." Clara looked at the coat on the chair by the window, the single letter on the lining, A. She looked back at her father, and she kept her face entirely still, and she said, "Yes, I suppose it would." The dress was 3 seasons old. Clara knew it. The women at Ashford House would know it. The cut was slightly wrong for the current fashion, the sleeves a fraction too full, the waist sitting just a breath too high, and anyone with a trained eye would place it within moments of looking at her. In certain rooms, an outdated dress was merely an observation. In rooms like this one, it was a verdict. Clara put it on anyway. She had one other option, a pale green thing that had belonged to her mother and had been altered twice already, the seams strained to their limits. The blue dress was old. The green dress was older and desperate. There was a difference, she had decided, between a woman who couldn't afford the latest fashion and a woman who was unraveling. She would be the former tonight. She would be nothing else. She did her own hair. She had done her own hair for 2 years now, since they'd let the last of the household staff go. She was not particularly skilled at it, but she was precise, and precision, she had found, could substitute for many things. Her father was waiting at the bottom of the stairs when she came down. He looked at her for a moment, that particular look fathers give daughters when they are trying not to say something they're feeling, and then he offered his arm. "You look very well," he said. "Thank you, Papa," Clara said. Neither of them mentioned the dress. Ashford House was lit from within like something out of a painting. Clara had passed it before, on ordinary afternoons, when it sat behind its iron gates with the quiet authority of a place that had never needed to announce itself. Tonight it was transformed, every window blazing, carriages lining the street 3 deep, the sound of music drifting out into the cold air like a rumor. Footmen stood at attention along the entrance steps. the women going in wore silk, and feathers and jewels that caught the torchlight. Clara walked up the steps with her chin level and her hands perfectly still. The entrance hall was worse than she'd anticipated. Not because it was unkind. No one looked at her directly. No one said anything, but because it was so entirely, effortlessly magnificent that standing inside it felt like standing inside someone else's life. The ceilings were impossibly high. The flowers alone must have cost more than her father's quarterly income. Everything gleamed. She found a spot near the edge of the room and stood there for a moment, taking it in, getting her bearings the way she always did in unfamiliar territory. Cataloging, preparing, and then she saw him. She recognized him before she should have been able to. She hadn't seen his face clearly, not really, not in the rain and the dark, but she knew him anyway. The height. The way he held himself, not stiffly, not with effort, but with the particular ease of a man who had never once wondered whether he belonged somewhere. He was standing near the far end of the room, saying something to the man beside him, and there was a small group arranged around him, the way people arrange themselves around sources of warmth. James Cavendish, Duke of Ashford. Clara went very still. She had known, of course. She had known since her father had set that envelope on the breakfast table, and she had looked at the coat on the chair. She had spent the week telling herself it was a coincidence, that there were other names beginning with A, that a coat proved nothing, that she was constructing a story from very thin material. But she had known. And now he was 20 feet away and he was turning slightly, and his eyes moved across the room in that particular way, the survey of a man who is aware of everything happening around him even when he appears to be looking at nothing. His gaze passed over her, and continued. No pause, no flicker, no recognition, nothing. Clara breathed in slowly through her nose. She was being irrational. The night had been dark. She had been drenched, her hair plastered to her face, wrapped in his own coat. He had seen her for 2 minutes. People did not remember strangers from 2 minutes in the rain. This was entirely reasonable. She was being foolish. She looked away first. The evening arranged itself the way such evenings did, in patterns that looked like mingling but were in fact a series of very careful negotiations. Who spoke to whom? For how long? In which part of the room? Clara navigated it all with the competence of long practice. She was pleasant to the people who addressed her. She did not force conversation where it was not wanted. She did not look across the room more than twice. The second time she looked, he was with a woman. Lady Cecilia Bourne was everything a room like this produced at its finest. Pale and composed, with dark hair arranged flawlessly, and a gown the color of champagne that had clearly been made specifically for this evening, specifically for her. She stood beside James with the quiet confidence of a woman who knew her position and had never had cause to question it. Her hand rested on his arm. Clara looked away immediately. She was not sure what she had expected. She was not sure she had expected anything. She was here because her father had received an invitation, and it would have been foolish not to come. She was here in a 3-season-old dress because it was the best she had. She was first time at Ashford House. Clara turned. The woman beside her was older, 60, perhaps, with sharp eyes and a pleasantly deceptive expression, the kind of face that looked merely friendly until you noticed how much it was taking in. "Yes," Clara said. "Is it that obvious?" "Only because you're looking at the ceiling," the woman said. "People who have been here before have stopped noticing it. I'm Mrs. Hale. James is my nephew." Clara kept her expression smooth. "Miss Voss, Clara Voss." Mrs. Hale looked at her with those sharp eyes and smiled. "Are you enjoying yourself, Miss Voss?" "Very much," Clara said, which was not quite true, and she suspected Mrs. Hale knew it was not quite true, and she suspected Mrs. Hale found this interesting. "I do hope you'll come again," Mrs. Hale said pleasantly. "These evenings can be rather overwhelming the first time. They improve." "You're very kind," Clara said. Mrs. Hale gave her one more look, the kind that felt like being read, and then moved away into the crowd, and Clara was alone again. She did not look across the room a third time. She was collecting her shawl from the cloakroom, ready to find her father and leave when it happened. She didn't plan it. There was a narrow corridor between the cloakroom and the entrance hall, and she turned a corner and he was there. James Cavendish, alone for just a moment, separated from his group, moving from one room to another unhurried. They were 3 feet apart. He looked at her. Clara felt something tighten in her chest, anticipation, or perhaps bracing. She couldn't have said which, and she waited. His expression was courteous, distant, the face of a man acknowledging a stranger at a party. He inclined his head, the faintest polite gesture, and then he walked past her. Clara stood very still in the corridor for a moment after he'd gone. Then she put on her shawl, found her father near the entrance, and walked out of Ashford House with her head exactly level and her hands perfectly still. She did not speak on the ride home. Her father, who understood certain silences, did not ask her to. It was only when she was home, coat in hand, because she had brought it with the intention of finding some way to return it this evening, and had lost her nerve entirely, that she noticed it. She had run her fingers along the lining a dozen times this week. She knew its texture. She knew the embroidered letter, the quality of the stitching. She had not noticed before tonight that the lining had a small interior pocket, and in the pocket, folded twice, sealed with no wax, no crest, nothing to identify it, a note. Clara held it in the light for a long moment. It was not addressed to anyone. It had no name on the outside. It was possible it was nothing, a forgotten receipt, an old reminder, something mundane left in a coat pocket and never retrieved. It was also possible it was not. Her fingers worked at the fold. She could open it in 3 seconds. She could know in 3 seconds whether this was anything at all. She stopped. She set the note on the desk. She looked at it. Then she picked up the candle, walked to the fireplace and held the flame close, and stopped again. She stood there for a long time, note in one hand, candle in the other, while the fire crackled and the house slept around her, and the rain, which had started again softly, tapped against the windows. She did something she could not entirely explain, even to herself. She put the candle back. She folded the note again. And she placed it inside her own small jewelry box, beneath the pearls that had been her mother's, the only things of value she had left, and closed the lid. She did not open it again that night, but she did not burn it either. The jewelry box sat on Clara's dressing table for 4 days. She did not open it. She was not tempted to open it, or rather, she was tempted precisely once on the second morning when she woke early and lay in the gray light thinking about nothing in particular, and then suddenly thinking about it very particularly. She got up, crossed the room, put her hand on the lid. And then she went downstairs and made tea instead. This was, she told herself, entirely rational behavior. The note was almost certainly nothing. A forgotten errand. A tradesman's receipt. Something written to someone else entirely, left in a coat pocket by accident, irrelevant to her in every possible way. Opening it would satisfy a curiosity she shouldn't have in the first place about a man who had looked through her like glass not once but twice. Once in a corridor at his own party, and once, more importantly, in the 20 feet of distance between them across a ballroom where she had stood in a 3 seasons old dress and waited, and he had looked, and he had continued looking at something else. She was not curious about him. She was simply keeping the note because burning it felt dramatic, and she had promised herself years ago that she would not be dramatic about things. Her circumstances were difficult enough without adding theatrics. The note stayed in the jewelry box. Clara got on with her life. Her life at present consisted primarily of 2 things. The first was her father, who required managing in the way that kind, defeated men often did, gently, without making it apparent that managing was occurring. Lord Voss was not a bad man. Clara had decided this firmly and returned to it whenever the evidence became complicated. He was a man who had been built for a world that had certain guarantees, and when those guarantees had dissolved, he had dissolved somewhat with them. He spent his mornings with his correspondence and his afternoons with a book he never seemed to make progress in, and he looked at Clara sometimes with an expression she found difficult to meet, not because it was unkind, but because it was sorry. He was so very sorry in such a quiet and total way, and there was nothing either of them could do about it. The second thing was Mrs. Hartley's daughters. Clara gave them French lessons on Tuesdays and Thursdays. It was not announced. It was not discussed in company. It was simply a fact of her life now, like the mended gloves and the done-herself hair, one of the many small arrangements that kept the household from the particular edge they were edging toward. Mrs. Hartley paid her a modest sum and occasionally pressed additional food upon her under the guise of having made too much, which Clara accepted with grace, because grace was the only currency she had in abundance. She was returning from one such Tuesday when she found the man at their door. He was not what she expected. She had been anticipating, in some vague way, another creditor. They came occasionally, with their careful faces and their careful language, men who were professionally sympathetic and professionally immovable. This man was not that. He was young, perhaps 30, neatly dressed, with the precise and slightly harried air of someone who spent his life managing complicated situations on behalf of people who didn't want to manage them personally. He turned when he heard her footsteps on the path. "Miss Voss," he said. "Yes," said Clara. He introduced himself, Mr. Aldridge, he said, solicitor, representing the estate of the Duke of Ashford. He was here on a matter concerning Lord Voss. A small administrative matter, entirely routine, he was sure she understood. Clara understood nothing of the kind, but she opened the door and showed him into the sitting room because there was nothing else to do. She went to find her father. Lord Voss came downstairs looking faintly alarmed, which was his expression for most unexpected events. Clara made tea. She set it on the table and prepared to leave. This was her father's business, not hers. And then Mr. Aldridge said, with the particularly neutral tone of a man choosing his words carefully, "Perhaps Miss Voss might stay, in case Lord Voss requires any assistance with the details." Clara looked at Mr. Aldridge. Mr. Aldridge looked back at her with an expression she could not read. She sat down. The matter was indeed administrative. There was an old account, a debt, technically, though Mr. Aldridge was careful not to use that word, between Lord Voss and the Ashford estate, going back some years. The Duke had recently undertaken a review of the estate's outstanding accounts, as dukes occasionally did, and this particular item had come to his attention. Lord Voss's hands tightened on his teacup. Clara watched her father's face and kept her own very still. The terms, Mr. Aldridge said, were entirely open to discussion. The Duke had no interest in, and here he paused for just a fraction too long, in any outcome that caused undue difficulty. He was prepared to be reasonable. "Reasonable," Lord Voss repeated, in the voice of a man who has heard that word used against him before. "Very much so," Mr. Aldridge said. Clara set down her tea. "What is the sum?" Mr. Aldridge told her. She kept her face perfectly still. It was not an impossible sum. It was not a possible sum either. It lived in the specific territory of numbers that looked merely large until you placed them against the reality of what they had, and then they became something else entirely. "And the Duke's timeline?" she asked. Mr. Aldridge looked at her directly for the first time since she'd sat down. "There is no fixed timeline," he said. "As I said, the Duke wishes to be reasonable." "Dukes," Clara said pleasantly, "are rarely reasonable about money without a reason." Mr. Aldridge was quiet for a moment. Then he said, with the careful precision of a man delivering a message he is not entirely sure he understands, "The Duke is aware that the Voss family has experienced some changes in circumstance. He considers that relevant." "Does he?" said Clara. "He does." She looked at this young solicitor, his careful face, his careful words, and she had the distinct and uncomfortable feeling that she was receiving a message she didn't have the full text of. "I'll see you out," she said. At the door, while her father was still in the sitting room with his hands around his teacup, Clara stopped Mr. Aldridge on the step. "You said the Duke recently reviewed his outstanding accounts," she said. "Yes," said Mr. Aldridge. "This account has existed for some years." "It has." "And he chose to address it now," Clara said. "This week, this particular week." Mr. Aldridge met her eyes. He was a professional. He was very good at saying nothing with his expression. He was not quite good enough. "The Duke," Clara said, keeping her voice even. "Does he know who I am?" A pause, just one beat too long. "He knows your father, Miss Voss," Mr. Aldridge said carefully. Clara held the door. "You've seen me before," she said. "When I opened the door you recognized me, before I gave my name." Mr. Aldridge said nothing. "Why?" she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked away, down the street, as if the answer might be somewhere in the middle distance. "I was given a description," he said finally, in case there was any difficulty locating the correct household." "A description," Clara repeated. "Yes. What description?" Another pause. He was clearly deciding how much of this was his to give. "The Duke said," Mr. Aldridge said, in the tone of a man reading from an internal document he would very much rather not be reading from, "You'll know her. She'll answer the door herself and she won't look like she minds it." Clara said nothing. Mr. Aldridge cleared his throat. "Good day, Miss Voss." He went down the steps and along the path and through the gate, and Clara stood in the doorway and watched him go, and she did not move until he had turned the corner and disappeared. She went back inside. She went upstairs. She sat at her dressing table and looked at the jewelry box. She did not open it. But for the first time in 4 days, she put her hand on the lid and left it there for a very long time. That evening, in his study across the city, James Cavendish looked up from his correspondence when Mr. Aldridge was shown in. "Well," he said. Mr. Aldridge set his hat on the chair. He considered briefly how to say what he needed to say. "She's not what I expected," he said. James said nothing. "She's..." Mr. Aldridge paused. "She asked the right questions, sir, all of them." "Did she?" "In the right order." He paused again. "She knows you sent me." James looked back at his correspondence. "And the note," he said. "Did she mention—" "No," said Mr. Aldridge. "She didn't mention it." A silence. "She kept it, though," James said. It was not quite a question. Mr. Aldridge thought about the way Clara Voss had stood in the doorway. The jewelry box he hadn't seen but somehow felt certain about anyway. "I believe so, sir," he said. "Yes." James set down his pen. He was quiet for a moment, in the way of a man who is thinking about something he has been trying not to think about. "That'll be all, Aldridge," he said. Mr. Aldridge collected his hat and went. James sat alone in his study for a while longer than he needed to. The fire crackled. Outside, London went about its business. Somewhere across the city, in a house that was somewhat too quiet and somewhat too empty, a woman was sitting at a dressing table with her hand on a jewelry box. He wondered what she was deciding. He suspected, and this was the part he found most difficult to account for, that whatever she decided, it would be exactly right. The invitation arrived on a Wednesday. It was beautifully written, of course it was. Lady Cecilia Bourne did nothing that was not beautiful, which Clara had come to understand was itself a kind of weapon. The card was cream, the handwriting precise and elegant, the wording warm in the way that very cold things sometimes are when they want something from you. "Dear Miss Voss, I have heard so much about you from dear Mrs. Hale, and I find I am quite eager to make your proper acquaintance. Would you join a small gathering for tea on Friday at 3 o'clock? It will be only a few of us, quite informal. Yours with anticipation, Lady Cecilia Bourne." Clara read it twice. Then she set it on the table and looked at it the way she looked at things she was trying to understand fully before she touched them again. "Dear Mrs. Hale, quite informal. A small gathering. Every word was chosen. She was certain of it. She thought about declining. She constructed the refusal in her head, a prior engagement, a slight indisposition, something gracious and final. She could simply not go. Lady Cecilia could not compel her. No one could compel her to walk into a room that was clearly prepared for her arrival in a way that had nothing to do with welcome. She thought about all of this very carefully. Then she wrote back and accepted. Because declining was also a choice that meant something, and Clara was not yet ready to mean it. She arrived exactly on time, which she knew was itself a statement. People who were uncertain arrived early. People who wanted to appear unbothered arrived late. Arriving at precisely 3 o'clock said, "I am neither anxious nor performing the absence of anxiety. I am simply here." The house was Cecilia's mother's, large, impeccably maintained, the kind of house where everything matched in a way that required significant effort to make look effortless. A maid showed Clara through to the drawing room, and Clara had 3 seconds in the doorway to take in the room before anyone looked up. 6 women. Not the few of the invitation, 6 was a number chosen specifically, large enough that Clara would feel the collective weight of the room, small enough that there was nowhere to retreat to. Lady Cecilia rose first. She was, in person, even more composed than she had appeared at the ball, the sort of composure that came from never having had genuine cause to be afraid of anything. "Miss Voss," she said warmly, coming forward with both hands extended, "I am so glad you came. I was afraid you might not." "I almost didn't," Clara said pleasantly, "but I find I rarely regret going somewhere new." Something moved behind Cecilia's eyes, too fast to name. "Come and sit down," Cecilia said. "Let me introduce everyone." The introductions were performed. Clara catalogued the women the way she catalogued rooms, quickly, completely, filing away what mattered. 2 of them she recognized from the ball, faces she'd seen in the outer orbits of Cecilia's circle. One was Cecilia's cousin, younger, with the look of someone who had not yet decided how comfortable she was with whatever this afternoon was. 2 others were the kind of women who existed in these rooms as audience, present, attentive, waiting to take their cues. Tea was poured, conversation began. It was, for the first 20 minutes, entirely benign. The weather, a recent exhibition that 2 of them had attended, a dinner that had apparently been remarkable for reasons Clara couldn't follow. Cecilia was a skilled hostess. She kept the conversation moving, included Clara with small questions that required only small answers, and gave no indication whatsoever that anything other than tea was on offer. Clara ate a small sandwich and waited. She didn't have to wait long. "I understand you've met Mrs. Hale," Cecilia said, turning to Clara with an expression of bright interest. "She mentioned you particularly." "She was very kind at the ball," Clara said. "She is kind to everyone," Cecilia agreed. "It's one of her great qualities. She never distinguishes." A small, gentle pause. She once spent 20 minutes in deep conversation with a woman who had arrived at the wrong party entirely, still brought her tea. Light laughter from the room. Clara smiled. "That speaks well of her." "It does," Cecilia said, "though one sometimes wonders if a little more discernment might serve her better in certain situations." The word discernment landed on the table between them. Clara picked up her teacup. "I imagine she manages perfectly well," Clara said. "Of course," Cecilia said. "I only mean these gatherings can be difficult to navigate for anyone unfamiliar with the particular texture of this world." She looked at Clara with an expression of perfect solicitude. "You've not been out in society long, have you, Miss Voss? I don't recall seeing you in previous seasons." "My family had a period of quiet," Clara said. The language of it, a period of quiet, was the accepted formula, and she used it without apology. "Of course," Cecilia said softly, "how difficult that must have been." "Not especially," Clara said, a brief silence. One of the audience women reached for a biscuit. Cecilia's cousin looked at her teacup. I only ask, Cecilia continued, because I think it must be disorienting to return to these rooms after a significant absence. So much has changed. Relationships have formed. Understandings are in place. She smiled warmly. It can be easy to misread a situation when one doesn't have the full history. Clara looked at her. Lady Cecilia looked back. The rest of the room had gone very slightly still, the way rooms go still when everyone present knows what is happening and is waiting to see how it resolves. You're very thoughtful, Clara said, to be concerned. I simply hate to see anyone confused, Cecilia said, about where things stand. Clara set her cup down, very gently, very precisely. She looked at the table for just a moment, at the flowers in the center, at the silver teapot catching the afternoon light, at the small, perfect arrangements of a room built entirely for a specific purpose today. Then she looked up. Lady Cecilia, she said, you have a beautiful home and you are a remarkable hostess. Everything today has been immaculate. She paused. I am not confused about where things stand. I have never been confused about where things stand. Another pause. I came today because I thought it polite to accept. I'll leave now for the same reason. She stood. The room was absolutely silent. Clara looked around at the assembled women, not with hostility, not with performance, simply looked briefly, the way you look at a room you are leaving and won't remember fondly. Thank you for the tea, she said to Cecilia. It was excellent. She left. She walked home. The afternoon was cold and bright, the kind of autumn afternoon that looked warmer than it was, and Clara walked quickly without quite running, keeping her hands still at her sides, keeping her face forward. She did not let herself feel anything until she had turned off the main road onto the quieter street that led home. And then, just for a moment, just for the length of one long exhale, she allowed it. Not humiliation, not quite. Something colder than humiliation. The specific feeling of being looked at and found insufficient, and having known in advance that this was the intention, and having gone anyway, and having survived it and still feeling the print of it on her skin. She breathed out. She breathed in again. By the time she reached her gate, she was entirely composed. She almost missed him. He was on foot, which was not how she would have expected to encounter a duke on an ordinary Thursday afternoon. On the pavement, without a carriage, without attendants, walking with the particular economy of a man who has somewhere to be and no patience for the scenic route. He saw her at the same moment she saw him. They were perhaps 10 feet apart on a quiet street with almost no one else on it, and there was no crowd to look at, no room to survey, no glass to look through her with. He stopped. Clara stopped. For a moment, neither of them did anything at all. Then James Cavendish said, in a voice that was carefully even, Miss Voss. He knew her name. Of course he knew her name. She had known, ever since Mr. Aldridge and his description, that he knew exactly who she was. But hearing it, her name, in his voice, on a quiet street, was different from knowing it abstractly, and she felt the difference in her chest in a way she chose not to examine. Your Grace, she said. He looked at her, not through her, not past her, directly at her, with an expression she could not name because she had not seen it before. Something that was not quite apology and not quite question and not quite something else but contained elements of all three. I owe you, he began. You don't, Clara said. He stopped. You owe me nothing, she said pleasantly. We have never been introduced. There is nothing outstanding between us. She held his gaze. I believe that's where things stand. She had borrowed Cecilia's phrase deliberately. She saw him hear it. Something moved across his face. She walked past him. She counted her steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, before she heard him turn. Miss Voss. She stopped. She did not turn around immediately. She gave herself exactly one breath. Then she turned. He was looking at her with that expression she couldn't name, and his jaw was set in the way of a man who is saying something it costs him something to say. I saw you, he said. At the ball, I knew exactly who you were. The street was quiet. Somewhere a door closed, distant, irrelevant. "I know," Clara said. She turned back around. She walked the remaining half a block to her gate, opened it, went through and closed it behind her with a small, definitive click. She went inside. She went upstairs. She sat at her dressing table and looked at the jewelry box, and this time she felt something so complicated and so layered that she couldn't have named any single part of it. She didn't try. She simply sat in the quiet of the late afternoon and breathed. That evening, across the city, James sat in his usual chair in his usual club, with a drink he had not touched, and said nothing for long enough that the man beside him, Lord Harwick, an old friend with the particular gift of knowing when not to speak, eventually set down his own glass. "You look," Lord Harwick said carefully, "like a man who has recently done something he cannot undo." James said nothing. "Or failed to do something," Harwick amended. "One of the two." James looked at his drink. "She was at Cecilia's today," he said. Harwick was quiet for a moment. "Cecilia invited her, apparently." "And you knew?" James said nothing, which was its own answer. Harwick picked up his glass again. He was a thoughtful man. He thought for a while. "Did she?" he started. "She left early," James said, "on her own terms." A pause. "Then I ran into her on the street. And," James looked at the fire, "I told her I'd seen her at the ball, that I'd known who she was." Harwick absorbed this. "How did she take it?" James was quiet for a long moment. "She said she knew," he said, "and then she walked away." "Ah," said Harwick. "Yes," said James. "They sat with the fire for a while." "The thing about that," Harwick said eventually, in the tone of a man who is about to say something his friend will not enjoy hearing, "is that a woman who already knows the worst of you and walks away, don't," James said, "is considerably more dangerous," Harwick finished, "than one who doesn't." James picked up his drink. He didn't say anything else, but he didn't disagree either. Mrs. Hale did not come unannounced. She sent a note the morning before, which was her way. She was a woman who believed in the courtesy of warning, particularly when what she intended to say required the recipient to have a chair available and a drink within reach. The note said only that she would call at 11 if James was amenable, and that she had something to discuss that was not suitable for correspondence. James had read the note twice and felt, with the certainty of long acquaintance, that he was not going to enjoy the 11 o'clock conversation. He was correct. She arrived exactly at 11, which was also her way. She settled herself in the chair across from his desk with the particular efficiency of a small woman who had spent decades making herself comfortable in rooms designed for larger people, accepted the tea James ordered without comment, and looked at him for a moment in the way she sometimes did, as if she were deciding at the last possible instant whether to say the thing or not. Then she said it. "I need to tell you something about your father," she said, "and about Lord Voss." James set down his pen. "I have known this for a long time," Mrs. Hale continued. "I want you to understand that before I say anything else. I have known it for 11 years, and I did not tell you for reasons that seemed sufficient at the time and seem considerably less sufficient now." She folded her hands in her lap. "I am telling you today because of the girl." "Miss Voss," James said. "Miss Voss," she agreed. "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, London conducted its ordinary business, carriages and footsteps and the distant sound of a vendor calling something unintelligible. In the study, the fire crackled, and the clock on the mantel measured out the silence. "Your father," Mrs. Hale said, "was not always the man you remember." James said nothing. He had his own memories of his father, complicated, as most memories of difficult men are complicated, layered with things understood only in retrospect. "He was capable of great warmth," Mrs. Hale said. "You know that. He was also capable of a particular kind of ruthlessness when he wanted something badly enough, when he felt cornered, when he believed that what he wanted was important enough to justify the method." She paused. "You know that too." "Get to it," James said quietly. Mrs. Hale looked at him. "11 years ago," she said, Lord Voss and your father had a business arrangement. A land agreement, a parcel in the north, significant value terms that had been negotiated between them over the course of several years. Lord Voss had invested considerably. Not just money, time, relationships. He had built something on the expectation of that agreement holding. She paused. Your father changed the terms. At the last possible moment when Voss had no recourse. He inserted a clause buried in the documentation, drafted by his own lawyers, never explained to Voss until the signing, that effectively transferred the primary benefit to the Ashford estate. James was very still. Voss signed, Mrs. Hale continued. He didn't understand fully what he was signing. His own lawyer, a young man, not very experienced, not up to the complexity of what your father's team had drafted, didn't catch it. By the time anyone understood what had happened, it was binding. She looked at her hands. Voss tried to contest it. He couldn't. He lost the land, the investment, everything he had built toward. Within 2 years, the Voss family finances had collapsed. A pause. Your father knew. He knew exactly what had happened. He never acknowledged it. The clock on the mantel ticked. James looked at the desk in front of him, at the papers, the pen, the ordinary objects of an ordinary morning, and he breathed very carefully and said nothing for a long time. Clara Voss, he said finally. She was how old? 15, Mrs. Hale said, when it happened. Old enough to understand that everything had changed, young enough that she had no power to do anything about it. James closed his eyes briefly. He thought about a girl of 15 watching her family's world come apart. He thought about the specific education that gave a person the particular hardening of something that should have been allowed to stay soft for longer. He thought about a woman on a road in the rain, walking because she had refused a carriage, and he understood now, with a clarity that was deeply unpleasant, exactly what kind of pride that was. Not vanity, not stubbornness. The pride of someone who had learned, early and thoroughly, that accepting things from people meant being at their mercy. That the only safe position was to need nothing from anyone. He had given her his coat. She had kept it and kept the note, and not burned either of them, and he understood now what it had cost her not to. Why didn't you tell me? He said. It was not quite an accusation. It was something more tired than an accusation. Because you were 23 when your father died, Mrs. Hale said, and you had enough to carry, and I told myself the Voss family would recover, that it wasn't my business, that the damage was done and naming it would only add to the weight. She looked at him steadily. I was wrong. I have known I was wrong for some time. The debt, James said, the outstanding account, the one I sent Aldridge about, is almost certainly a fiction, Mrs. Hale said calmly, or at least significantly inflated, adjusted over the years by people who benefited from the original arrangement. I cannot prove that, but I am quite confident in it. James stood up. He walked to the window and stood there with his back to the room, looking out at the street below, at the ordinary Tuesday morning of it, the people moving with their ordinary purposes. She doesn't know, he said. She knows the money went, Mrs. Hale said. She knows her father lost something he didn't entirely understand losing. Whether she knows there was deliberate action behind it, a pause. I don't think so. No, Lord Voss never spoke of it. I believe he was ashamed. Not of himself precisely, but of having been outmaneuvered, of having trusted. James said nothing. James, Mrs. Hale said. He turned. She was looking at him with the expression she reserved for things that mattered, clear-eyed, undecorated. The face of a woman who had decided the truth was more useful than comfort. You have been looking at that girl since the moment she walked into your ball, she said. Don't tell me you haven't, because I was watching, and I know your face better than you do. Whatever is happening, whatever you think it is or isn't, you need to understand what your family did to hers before you take another step in any direction. James looked at his aunt. Why now? He said. Why tell me now and not 6 weeks ago, before the ball, before any of this? Because 6 weeks ago she was a name in an account ledger, Mrs. Hale said simply. And now she isn't. A silence. She burned the note, James said, It wasn't what he meant to say, it came out anyway. Mrs. Hale looked at him carefully. Did she? Aldridge said she kept it, but she hasn't, he stopped. Hasn't responded, Mrs. Hale said. Hasn't burned it either, James said. Aldridge was certain. Mrs. Hale was quiet for a moment. There is a difference, she said gently, between keeping something and knowing what to do with it. James turned back to the window. He thought about Clara Voss on the quiet street, her face, that moment when he'd said, "I knew exactly who you were," and she'd said, "I know," and walked away. The specific quality of that walk, not wounded, not running, simply done. The walk of a woman who had decided something and was enacting the decision. He had admired it. Even in that moment, even stinging from it, he had admired it completely. And now he understood that she had been walking away from things her whole life, not because she wanted to, but because she had been given no other option. Because his father had taken the options, 11 years ago, in a room she'd never been allowed into, in language she'd never been shown. "What do I do?" he said. It came out quieter than he intended. Mrs. Hale stood. She gathered herself with that efficient economy of movement, smoothed her skirts, set down her teacup. "That," she said, "is entirely up to you. I've told you what I know. What you do with it is your own business." She moved toward the door and then paused, her hand on the frame. "Though I will say this." James looked at her. "She answered the door herself," Mrs. Hale said. "Every time. Never a maid, never a servant. She opens her own door, James. She has been opening her own door for years." She paused. "When you decide to knock, and I think you will decide to knock, make sure you have something worth saying." She left. James stood in the empty study for a long time. He reviewed the Voss account that afternoon. He had his father's papers brought up from the archive, boxes of them. Decades of correspondence and agreements and documentation, the accumulated machinery of a large estate run by a man who had been meticulous about record-keeping in the way that men with things to hide sometimes are. It took him 3 hours. He found it in the second box, the original land agreement, the amendment, the clause his father's lawyers had inserted. He read it 3 times. Then he set it down on the desk and sat with it. It was worse than Mrs. Hale had described. Not dramatically worse, the basic facts were as she'd said, but the details were worse. The deliberateness of it, the patience. His father had not acted in haste or in anger. He had planned it carefully over several months, had waited for precisely the right moment, had ensured that every legal avenue was closed before the signing. It was the work of a man who had decided what he wanted and had found the most efficient route to it, regardless of what that route crossed. James closed the box. He thought about Clara Voss doing French lessons for Mrs. Hartley's daughters. He knew this, Aldridge had mentioned it, in passing, in the way of a man who doesn't realize the detail matters. He thought about the dress she'd worn to the ball, not because it was inadequate, but because of what it must have cost her, standing in it, in his house, in his rooms, knowing she was being measured against them. He thought about the note. He had written it in the carriage afterward in the dark, which was why the handwriting was worse than usual. He had not planned to write it. He had not planned any of it, not stopping, not the coat, certainly not sitting in his carriage afterward with a feeling he could not account for and writing a note to put in the pocket of a coat he'd given to a woman whose name he didn't know. Sizi Girdum, her Odada, her Zaman. No, in English. He had written it in English. "I saw you. In every room, always. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I would like to know your name." He had put it in the pocket because he hadn't known what else to do with it. Because leaving it in his own possession felt worse, somehow, than giving it away. She had kept it. She had not read it, or, if she had read it, she had not acknowledged it. She was carrying it around in her jewelry box like a thing she hadn't decided about yet, and James found, sitting in the quiet of his study with his father's papers in front of him, that this was almost unbearable. Not because he needed the answer, but because she deserved to be able to give it freely, without the weight of what his family had done, without the debt that wasn't really a debt, without the specific disadvantage she had been placed in before she was old enough to have done anything to deserve it. She couldn't give him a free answer until she knew the truth, and she didn't know the truth, which meant he was going to have to tell her. He sat with that for a while, then he picked up his pen. He did not write to Clara, he wrote to Lord Voss. A short letter, carefully worded, legally precise, unambiguous. He enclosed the relevant documentation from the archive. He wrote that the outstanding account between their families was, upon review, not a valid debt, that it would be struck from the record, that any payments previously made under the arrangement would be, he paused here, then wrote it anyway, returned in full with interest calculated from the original date. He reviewed the letter once. He sealed it. He called for Aldridge. In a house across the city, Clara was sitting at the kitchen table doing the household accounts, a task she performed every Friday, with the systematic thoroughness of someone who has learned that ignoring numbers doesn't make them smaller, when she heard her father on the stairs. Lord Voss appeared in the doorway. He was holding a letter. His face was the color of old paper. "Papa," Clara said, standing immediately. "What is it?" "Sit down," he said. He said it gently, which frightened her more than if he'd said it otherwise. He sat down across from her. He set the letter on the table between them. Clara looked at it. She looked at her father. "Read it," he said. She read it. She read it twice. Then she set it down very carefully and looked at the table and breathed. "He's canceling the debt," she said. "Yes," said her father. "And returning what was paid." "Yes." Because she stopped. She looked at the documentation he had enclosed, the land agreement, the amendment, the clause. Her father's hands, she noticed, were very still on the table. He had known. Some part of him had always known. "Papa," she said quietly. Lord Voss looked at his daughter. And for the first time in 3 years, for the first time since everything had changed, Clara saw something break open in his face. Not collapse, not weakness, something else. The specific expression of a man who has been carrying something alone for a very long time and has just unexpectedly been relieved of part of the weight. His eyes were wet. "I'm sorry," he said. "Clara, I am so—" "Don't," she said. Her voice was steady. She put her hand over his. "Don't." They sat like that for a while. Outside, the Friday afternoon went on. The accounts on the table went unfinished. The numbers could wait. Eventually, Lord Voss straightened. He wiped his eyes with the brisk efficiency of a man embarrassed by emotion and grateful for its passing. "What do we do?" he said. Clara looked at the letter. She thought about a man on a quiet street saying, "I knew exactly who you were." She thought about a coat, and a note, and a jewelry box, and all the things she had been not deciding for weeks. She thought about what it meant that he had sent this letter to her father, not to her, that he had given Lord Voss his dignity back quietly without an audience. "Nothing yet," she said. "Clara." "Not yet, Papa." She folded the letter. She stood up. "I need to think." She went upstairs. She sat at the dressing table. She opened the jewelry box. She took out the note. She unfolded it. She read it. One line. His handwriting was not what she'd expected, less controlled than the rest of him, slightly hurried, as if written quickly before the impulse passed. "I saw you, in every room always. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I would like to know your name." Clara sat with it for a long time. Then she did something she had not done in longer than she could remember. She laughed. Softly, quietly, alone in her room, but genuinely the kind of laugh that surprises you by arriving. Because the man had written, "I don't deserve your forgiveness," before he even knew how much he was right. The letter arrived on a Monday, not to Clara, not to Lord Voss. To every drawing room in London that mattered, which was a considerably more efficient delivery system than the post. Clara heard about it on Tuesday, from Mrs. Hartley, who told her with the particular expression of a woman who is delivering bad news and knows it, and has decided that delivering it quickly is a kindness. The story, and it was being called a story, which was already its own category of damage, was that Miss Clara Voss had been seen entering a gentleman's private residence on 2 separate occasions, unaccompanied, at hours that were not appropriate for social calls. The gentleman was not named. He didn't need to be. Mrs. Hartley said she didn't believe a word of it, which Clara appreciated, and which she also understood meant that Mrs. Hartley believed enough of it to be uncertain, which was what Cecilia had intended. You didn't need people to believe completely. You needed them to hesitate, to look at Clara across a room and feel, for just a moment, unsure. That moment was enough. That moment, multiplied across enough drawing rooms, was everything. Clara walked home from the Hartley house very carefully. She was thinking, and she needed to think clearly, so she made herself notice things: the color of the sky, which was a particular hard gray, the sound of her footsteps, the cold of the air. She did this sometimes when she needed to stay on the surface of herself rather than being pulled under by what was happening inside. She had been careful. She had always been careful. There were no private residences, no unsuitable hours. Cecilia had constructed this entirely, had assembled it from nothing and delivered it with precision, and the particular cruelty of it was that the nothing it was assembled from was Clara herself. Her poverty, her 3 seasons-old dress, the fundamental precariousness of a position that offered no protection, no family name with sufficient weight, no social capital to spend in her own defense. She arrived home. She went inside. She sat down in the kitchen, not upstairs, not at the dressing table, and she put her hands flat on the table and she let herself feel it. It was bad. She was clear-eyed enough to know it was bad. The story would spread in the way these things spread, not quickly, but completely, moving from drawing room to drawing room like water finding its level, and when it settled it would have settled everywhere. The French lessons with Mrs. Hartley's daughters were almost certainly finished. The invitations that had begun, tentatively, to arrive since the Ashford ball finished. Whatever small, fragile re-entry into the world she had been attempting finished. She breathed. She put her hands in her lap. She thought about what she had, which was the exercise she performed when she needed to remember that the inventory was not empty. She had her father, who was not well but was present. She had the house, for now. She had her own competence, which had served her thus far and would continue to serve her. She had her mother's pearls. She had a coat in her wardrobe that she had never returned. She had a note in her jewelry box that she had read 17 times in the past week. She thought about what she was going to do. She had not decided yet when she heard her father's footsteps on the stairs. Lord Voss came into the kitchen with his coat still on, which meant he had just returned from somewhere. He looked at Clara. He read her face with the accuracy of a man who had been reading it for 23 years. "You've heard," he said. "Yes." He sat down across from her. He was quiet for a moment. "I'm going to call on Ashford," he said. Clara looked at her father. "Papa." "I know what you're going to say," he said. "And you're wrong. This is not, I will not sit in this house while my daughter's name is—" He stopped. His jaw set. Clara recognized the expression. It was the face he'd had when she was young, before everything, the face of a man who knew what his responsibilities were and intended to meet them. She had not seen it in a long time. "It won't help," Clara said gently, calling on him. "It will look like it will confirm that there is a connection worth confirming." "Then what?" Lord Voss said. Clara looked at the table. "Nothing," she said. "We do nothing, we wait, it passes eventually." "Clara," her father's voice was very quiet. "You have been doing nothing for 3 years. You have been waiting for 3 years. At some point doing nothing stops being patience and starts being don't," she said. He stopped. They sat in silence. "I'm going upstairs," Clara said. She went upstairs. She sat at the dressing table for a long time, without opening the jewelry box. The afternoon darkened to evening. She lit a candle. She looked at herself in the mirror, not in a vain way, not in a self-critical way, simply looking, the way she sometimes did when she needed to take stock. Dark eyes, set jaw, the face of a woman who had been managing things for a long time and was tired in a way she never said aloud. She was 23 years old. She felt, some days, significantly older. She opened the jewelry box. She took out the note. She was not going to read it again. She had read it enough times that she could have recited it without looking, but she held it, because there was something in the holding of it that helped, which was illogical, and she knew it and she held it anyway. I don't deserve your forgiveness. He was correct about that. The question she had been circling for days, approaching and retreating, unable to hold for more than a few seconds, was whether deserving it was the point. She was still sitting with this when she heard the front door. Downstairs, a knock. She heard her father's footsteps in the hall, the sound of the door opening, a low exchange of voices, her father's, and then another which she didn't immediately recognize, and then her father's again, sharper now. Then quiet. Then footsteps on the stairs. Her father's, slow and deliberate. He appeared in the doorway. He looked at Clara. His expression was the complicated one, the one with too many things in it to name. "There is someone here," he said. Clara looked at him. "He says he'll wait," Lord Voss said. "However long is necessary." A pause. "He also says," he stopped. He looked at his daughter with an expression she hadn't seen him direct at her in a very long time. Something that was, she realized, respect. The specific respect of a man who is deferring to someone he has decided is more capable of handling the thing than he is. "He said it's your door," Lord Voss said. "Whether to open it." Clara stood. She went to the window first. Outside, the street was quiet. A single figure stood on the pavement below, not at the door, not on the step, but on the pavement, some distance back, as if he had stepped away deliberately, as if he did not want to be perceived as pressing. She looked at him for a moment. He was not looking up. She turned from the window. She went downstairs. She stood at the door for a moment before opening it. One breath. She opened it. James Cavendish was at the bottom of the steps, as she'd seen from the window. He turned when he heard the door. He came up the steps slowly, which she understood was deliberate, giving her time to change her mind, to close the door again, to do anything other than stand and wait. She stood and waited. He stopped on the step below her, which put them at the same height. She didn't know if that was intentional. She suspected everything he did this evening was intentional. He looked at her. He looked, and this was new. This was something she hadn't seen in any of the previous encounters. Uncertain. Not afraid. Not weak. But uncertain, in the way of a man who has prepared what he intended to say and is now questioning whether it's adequate. "I know about the letter," he said. Clara said nothing. "I know Cecilia sent it," he said. "I know what it says. I know who received it." His jaw tightened slightly. "I owe you an apology for that, directly. Not through intermediaries, not by letter, directly." "You didn't write it," Clara said. "She did it because of me," James said. Because she understood that something had shifted, and she chose this method to address it, and I did not prevent it. I could have ended the engagement weeks ago. I didn't. That is my failure." Clara looked at him. "The engagement is ended," she said. "Yes." "When?" 3 days ago." Clara absorbed this. "Before the letter," she said. "Yes." "She sent it anyway." "Yes." Clara said nothing for a moment. She looked at the street behind him, ordinary and quiet, the evening settling over it. And she thought about Cecilia, born in her perfect house with her perfect handwriting, assembling nothing into damage with the patience of a woman who had decided that if she couldn't have something, she would ensure no one else could either. She felt something, not forgiveness, not yet, but something adjacent, a sort of tired clarity. "Come inside," Clara said. James looked at her. "It's cold," she said, "and I won't have a conversation on my doorstep." She turned and went inside. After a moment, she heard him follow. She took him to the sitting room, which was the only room that was presentable, and she did not offer tea because it was late, and offering tea felt like a performance of normality she didn't have the energy for. She sat. He sat across from her. Lord Voss, she noted, had disappeared entirely. She suspected he was in the kitchen, at a sufficient remove to be decent but close enough to be available if needed. She looked at James Cavendish in her sitting room. It was a very ordinary room. Small, slightly worn, the furniture good but old, the remnants of a household that had once been considerably larger. He sat in it without apparent discomfort, which she found herself noting. Some men would have been uncomfortable, would have let the contrast between this room and Ashford House show somewhere in their face or posture. He simply sat. "I read the note," she said. Something moved in his face. "I read it the night the letter came about my father's debt," she said. "The night you sent the documentation." James said nothing. "You wrote that you didn't deserve my forgiveness," Clara said. "You were correct. You didn't know at the time quite how correct you were." "I know now," he said, "what my father did." "Yes," she said, "I know you know," a pause. "I know because of how you addressed the debt. You returned the money to my father, not to me. You gave it back to him." She looked at James steadily. "That was the right thing to do. You understood that it was about his dignity, not just the money." James said nothing. His jaw moved very slightly. "I want to ask you something," Clara said, "and I want you to answer it honestly, not correctly. There is a difference and I think you know it." "Yes," he said. "The night in the rain," she said, "you didn't know who I was. No, you stopped anyway. Yes. Why?" He looked at her. He was quiet for a moment, and she believed him, that he was thinking about it rather than constructing it, because the pause had the quality of genuine consideration rather than preparation. "Because you were walking," he said, "in that rain in the dark alone, and you were walking as if you had decided to walk through it and arrive somewhere, and that was simply what was going to happen." He paused. "I've been in rooms full of people my entire life. I have very rarely seen someone who looked like they had entirely made up their mind about themselves." Clara looked at him. "That was why," he said. The sitting room was very quiet. Outside, the wind moved through the street. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked. "I have a question," James said. "May I?" Clara waited. "The note," he said. "You kept it for 3 weeks before reading it." "Yes. Why?" Clara looked at her hands. She thought about how to say this, not how to say it correctly, but how to say it honestly, which was the standard she had just held him to and could not now abandon. "Because reading it would have meant deciding something," she said, "and I wasn't ready." She looked up. "I had spent 3 years deciding nothing, waiting, managing." She paused. "Deciding something felt very large." James looked at her. "And now," he said. Clara looked back at him. The fire crackled, the clock ticked. The house sat quietly around them, worn and warm and entirely her own. "Now," she said, "I have decided something." James waited. "I am going to tell you my name," Clara said. "You asked for it. That was all you asked, for my name. I think that's where we should begin." Something happened in his face. Something she had not seen there before, not the uncertainty of the doorstep, not the control of the ballroom. Something unguarded and quick and real. "Clara," she said. "My name is Clara." He said nothing for a moment. Then very quietly, "James." She almost smiled. "I know," she said. She showed him out an hour later. They had talked not about everything, not even about most things, but about enough. The shape of what had happened. The shape of what might, carefully, with time, be possible. Nothing was promised. Nothing was declared. They were two people in a small sitting room who had decided together to begin. At the door, he paused. He reached into his coat, his current coat, not the one in her wardrobe, and produced a card. His card. He held it out. Clara looked at it. "In case," he said, "you think of something else you want to say." She took it. "Good night, Your Grace," she said. "Good night, Miss Voss," he said. He went down the steps and along the path and through the gate. At the gate he paused very briefly and looked back. Clara was still in the doorway. He inclined his head. She inclined hers. He left. She closed the door. She stood in the hallway for a moment. Then she went to the kitchen, where her father was sitting at the table with a cold cup of tea and an expression of elaborate innocence. "Papa," she said. "Yes," he said. "You heard everything." He considered this. "The sitting room walls are somewhat thin," he said. Clara sat down across from him. "Well," he said when she didn't speak. Clara looked at her father. At the face she had been watching for 23 years. The face that had crumpled and recovered and carried more than she'd wanted it to carry. She thought about what James had said. You were walking as if you had entirely made up your mind about yourself. She had made up her mind about herself a long time ago, in a rainstorm with nothing left to lose. She had simply not applied it until recently to this. I think, Clara said, that things are going to be different. Lord Voss looked at his daughter. He didn't say anything. But he picked up his cold cup of tea and raised it very slightly, in the manner of a man making a toast. He doesn't have the words for yet. Clara raised her empty hand in return. 2 days later, across the city, in a room full of London's most carefully assembled women, Lady Cecilia Bourne received a piece of information that she had not anticipated. The Duke of Ashford had been seen calling on a Miss Clara Voss, not at her back door, not covertly. At her front door in the evening in full view of the street. Cecilia heard this. She set down her teacup. She looked at the woman who had told her, and she arranged her face into an expression of polite interest. Later, alone, she looked out her window at the street below for a long time. She had miscalculated. She had understood that James's feelings had shifted. She had not understood quite what Clara Voss was, what kind of person, what kind of obstinate, clear-eyed, impossible kind of person, or she would have chosen differently. You couldn't ruin a woman who had already rebuilt herself from nothing. You could only push her and watch her find her footing, and understand too late that the pushing had only confirmed what she was made of. Cecilia turned from the window. She did not think about Clara Voss again, or she tried not to. She was not entirely successful. The story did not disappear overnight. Clara had not expected it to. These things moved at their own pace, spreading slowly, settling slowly, fading slowly, leaving a residue that took longer still to clear. She knew this. She had prepared herself for it. What she had not prepared herself for was how little it mattered. This was new. This was something she was still getting used to, the discovery that certain things she had spent years bracing against had lost their ability to land. The looks in the street, the deliberate unseeing of women who had briefly considered including her and were now reconsidering. The small, practiced cruelties of a world that protected itself by excluding anything that complicated its arrangements. She noticed them. She simply found, to her own quiet surprise, that she noticed them from a slight distance now, as if something had shifted in her, some internal furniture rearranged, and the blows were landing in a place that was no longer quite as exposed. She was thinking about this on a Thursday morning, sitting at the kitchen table with her tea, when she heard the knock. It was not an unusual knock. 3 times measured, neither too tentative nor too demanding. She got up and went to the door and opened it without particular ceremony, because she had learned over these years that ceremony at one's own door was a performance for visitors, and she was done performing. A boy, perhaps 12, with the look of someone employed to carry things between places without being curious about them. He was holding a box. "Miss Voss," he said. "Yes," said Clara. He held out the box. It was not large, plain wood, no markings, tied with a simple cord. She took it. It was lighter than she expected. "Who sent this?" she said. The boy produced a folded note separate from the box, handed over with the efficiency of someone who had been instructed carefully. Then he turned and left before she could ask anything further. Clara looked at the box. She looked at the note. She read the note first, standing in the open doorway with the cold morning air coming in around her. The handwriting was the same as the note in her jewelry box. She would have known it anywhere now, slightly hurried, less controlled than the rest of him, as if he wrote quickly before he could revise himself out of it. "Miss Voss, I believe this belongs to you. You have kept it better than I would have." I had intended to say more. I find I cannot improve on what I've already said. J.C. Clara stood in the doorway. She opened the box. Inside, folded with careful precision, was his coat. Not a new coat, not a replacement. The coat, the dark wool one, the one from the storm, the one with the embroidered A on the lining that she had run her fingers over so many times she knew it without looking. He had sent it back to her, not retrieved it, not asked for its return. Sent it back with a note that said it belonged to her. She stood there for a long time. Her father appeared at the top of the stairs. He looked at her. He looked at the box. He had the wisdom to say nothing. Clara closed the door. She set the box on the hall table. She went upstairs, past her father, to her room. She sat at the dressing table. She looked at herself in the mirror for a moment. And then she did something she rarely did, which was to let her face do what it wanted to do without managing it. What it wanted to do, apparently, was something between crying and laughing, which was not a combination she had much experience with, and which resolved itself after a moment into simply sitting very still with her eyes bright and her chest full of something she didn't have a name for yet. She thought about a road in November, rain coming down like punishment. A man who had stopped when he didn't have to, who had given something away and then pretended he hadn't, who had written a note and put it in a pocket in case she found it, who had told her he saw her when the entire rest of the world was performing the opposite. She thought about what it cost a person to keep pretending they didn't feel something. She had become quite expert at it herself. She did not send a reply that day. She spent the morning as she spent most mornings, the accounts, the household, the small machinery of keeping things running. She went to the Hartley house in the afternoon, because Mrs. Hartley had sent a note saying that the French lessons were absolutely to continue, and that anyone who said otherwise could address their concerns directly to her, which was the most warmth Clara had felt from that quarter in some time. She came home in the early evening. She made dinner, which was a simple thing. She had become a competent cook over the years, another of the undiscussed practicalities, and she and her father ate and talked about small things, the way they had learned to do, filling the spaces that used to be filled by a larger household with the ordinary details of their smaller life. After dinner, her father went to read. Clara washed up. She was drying the last of the plates when she heard it, the knock, different from the morning's knock. This one she knew before she consciously identified it. Something in the rhythm, the specific pressure of it, measured without being mechanical, the knock of a person who had stood on the other side of the door for a moment before knocking and had made a decision. She set down the plate. She went to the hall. She stood at the door. She did not open it immediately. Not from uncertainty, she was past uncertainty, or most of it, but because she was taking a breath. Because some moments deserved a breath before you walked into them. Then a voice from the other side. Low, even, the voice she had first heard in the rain on a November road, offering something she had refused and then taken anyway. Miss Voss. Not a knock this time, just her name. I am aware, James said through the door, that this is an unconventional approach. Clara put her hand on the door. He stopped. She heard him regroup, which was its own remarkable thing. She had not thought in the early weeks that he was a man who regrouped. She had thought he was a man who never needed to. I have been standing on this side of your door for an unreasonable amount of time, he said, which is somewhat humbling for a person of my particular, a pause. Dignity. Clara pressed her lips together. I sent you the coat this morning, he said, because I couldn't think of anything adequate to say, and I thought the coat might say it better. I am now reconsidering that logic. She heard him move, not away, just shifting, as if he were collecting himself. I owe you a full accounting, he said, of everything. My father, the land, what happened to your family, you deserve to hear all of it directly, not through documents, not through Aldridge, not through letters delivered to your father. Directly, from me. A pause. I know you've read the documentation. I know you understand what happened. I'm not here because I think information is what's missing. She waited. I'm here, he said, because I have been trying to find the correct way to do this for 6 weeks, and I have concluded that there is no correct way, and I am simply going to have to stand on this side of your door and say it. The hall was very quiet. I saw you in a rainstorm, James said. I didn't know your name, I didn't know anything about you. I knew that you were walking in the rain as if you had decided something important about yourself and nothing was going to interfere with it, and I couldn't drive past that. I couldn't." He paused. "And then I saw you at the ball and another pause. The quality of this one was different. Harder, she thought, for him to get through. I was afraid. That is the honest answer. I was afraid of what it meant that I couldn't look at anyone else in the room. I was afraid of what it would mean to reach towards something I didn't know how to ask for. So I looked through you, and I have not forgiven myself for that." Clara's hand was still on the door. "I know what my family did to yours," he said. "I know that I cannot fix it. I know that the money returned, the debt struck. None of that gives you back what was taken, the years of it, the weight of it, what it cost your father, what it cost you. I know that." A pause. "I'm not here to offer you a transaction. I'm not here to balance an account." His voice was very even, but she could hear the effort in the evenness now. "I'm here because Clara Voss opened her own door for 3 years, and I want, if she'll allow it, to stand on the same side of it as her." Silence. Clara breathed. "I'm aware," James said more quietly now, "that I have not earned that. I'm aware that I am asking for something I have very little right to ask for. I know that." A pause. "I'm asking anyway, because I have run out of the kind of pride that prevents asking." She heard him step back, the sound of someone preparing to leave, giving her the door, making it hers. Clara took her hand off the latch. She stood in the hall for one moment, just one, just long enough to feel the full weight of everything that had brought her here to this door on this evening, and then she opened it. He was on the step below. He turned when he heard the door. The evening was dark behind him, the street quiet, a lamp some distance away casting everything in a thin, gentle light. He looked at her, and she let herself look back fully, without managing it, without protecting herself from what she saw. He was afraid. Not of her, not exactly. Of this. Of having said all of it and still not knowing. Of having run out of things to offer except the truth and not knowing if the truth was enough. She understood that fear very well. "You wrote," Clara said, "that you wanted to know my name." "Yes," he said. "You know it now," she said. "You've known it for some time." "Yes," he said. She looked at him. "You should have asked me sooner," she said, "at the ball when you saw me." "I know," he said. "I know that. You made me stand in that room for an entire evening in a 3 seasons old dress. I know. And look at you from 20 feet away, Miss Voss, Clara," she said. He stopped. She looked at him standing on her step in the thin lamplight, this man who had stopped in a rainstorm and written a note and sent a coat and stood on the wrong side of her door for an unreasonable amount of time because he had run out of the kind of pride that prevented asking. "Come in," she said. "It's cold." He looked at her. "We've been here before," he said very quietly. "Yes," she said, "but this time I'm not going to refuse." She stepped back from the door. He came in. They sat in the same sitting room. The same worn chairs, the same small fire, the same clock that ticked on the mantel and measured the silence between things being said. This time, Clara did not manage herself. She sat in her own house and she said what she thought, and she let him say what he thought, and they were two people discovering, carefully, with the particular care of those who have both learned the cost of carelessness, what it meant to be in the same room without a performance between them. He told her everything about his father, not defensively, not with excuses, simply the truth of it, the man his father had been, the things he had done, the ways James had spent years both understanding and not understanding him. She listened. She told him things too. Not everything, not yet, there was time for the rest, but what it had been like, the 3 years of it. The accounts on the kitchen table every Friday. The hair she'd learned to do herself. The dress. She told him about the dress, and he listened with the specific attention of someone who is not listening in order to respond, but simply listening. And it was, she discovered, rather remarkable to be listened to in that particular way. At some point, Lord Voss appeared in the doorway, saw the situation, produced a bottle of something from a cabinet that Clara hadn't known contained anything, and set it on the table between them with the air of a man making a contribution. "Papa," Clara said. "I'll be in the kitchen," Lord Voss said with great dignity, "should anyone require anything." He disappeared. James looked at the bottle, then at Clara. "I like your father," he said. "He likes you too," Clara said, "considerably more than I initially thought appropriate." James almost smiled. "And now," Clara considered. "Now I think his judgment is perhaps not entirely wrong," she said. It was, for Clara Voss, an extraordinary concession. James looked at her with that expression she had finally found a name for. She had been trying to name it since the rainstorm. Through the ball and the corridor and the quiet street and the sitting room visits. And she had finally identified it the morning she'd opened the box and found the coat. It was the expression of someone who had found the thing they had not expected to find and were still getting used to the fact of it. She suspected she was wearing something similar. He left at a reasonable hour, which she appreciated. He had learned, she thought, that she did not respond well to being crowded, that what she needed was space around things, room to think, time to let what had happened settle before the next thing arrived. He seemed to understand this without being told. At the door, he paused. He reached into his coat, and she had a sudden, absurd moment of wondering if there was another note, but there was nothing. He had simply paused because he wanted to say one more thing and was finding the words. "The coat," he said. "I meant what I wrote. It belongs to you." Clara looked at him. "I disagree," she said. "I think it belongs to whoever needs it." He looked at her. "Keep it," she said. "For now, I'll tell you when I need it back." Something moved in his face, something quick and warm and almost undone. He controlled it immediately, which was habit, but she had seen it. She was learning to see him very quickly. "Good night, Clara," he said. "Good night, James," she said. She watched him go down the path, through the gate, into the street. He did not look back this time. He didn't need to. She closed the door. She leaned against it for a moment, in the quiet of her own hallway, and she breathed. Then she went to the kitchen, where her father was waiting with 2 cups of tea and the patient expression of a man who wants very badly to ask something and is exercising considerable restraint. Clara sat down. She wrapped her hands around the cup. She looked at her father. "Well," Lord Voss said, in precisely the same tone he had used the last time. Clara looked at the steam rising from the tea. She thought about coats and notes and rainstorms and doors, and all the long, slow, difficult work of deciding something. "I think," she said, "that I would like to be happy now." Lord Voss looked at his daughter. His eyes went bright. "Yes," he said very quietly. "I think that sounds right." Outside, James Cavendish walked back through London in the November air without a coat. He didn't mind. He had been cold before. He had been cold for years, in ways that had nothing to do with weather, and he was beginning to understand, had begun to understand perhaps on a road in a rainstorm, that the coldness was not a fixed condition. He walked, and the city moved around him, and he thought about a woman who opened her own door and meant it, who had kept a coat for weeks and a note for longer, and had still somehow given them back to him on her own terms. He thought about what she had said. "Keep it for now. I'll tell you when I need it back." He had spent 32 years in rooms that required him to need nothing from anyone. It had seemed, for a long time, like a form of strength. He was revising that assessment considerably. He walked home through the city, and for the first time in a long time, he did not dread arriving. The invitation said 8 o'clock. Clara was ready at 7:30, which was new. She had spent years arriving exactly on time, the precision of a woman who had something to prove about her own composure, and she was still getting used to the particular freedom of simply being ready when she was ready, without the architecture of a performance around it. She sat at the dressing table. She looked at herself in the mirror. The dress was new. Not extravagant, she was not yet comfortable with extravagant, and suspected she might never be entirely, which James had said he understood, and she believed him, but new and well-made, and the precise color of dark blue that she had chosen herself without consulting anyone. It fit perfectly because it had been made for her specifically, which was still a thing she was adjusting to. The idea that something had been made specifically for her. That she was a person for whom things were made. She was working on it. Her hair was done by a maid now, a young woman named Agnes who had strong opinions about pins and had won Clara's complete respect within a week. Clara still knew how to do it herself. She suspected she always would. That knowledge lived in her hands now and was not going anywhere, and she found she didn't want it to. She looked at the dressing table. The jewelry box was there, as it always was. She opened it. The pearls, her mother's, were still inside. She lifted them out and put them on, the familiar cool weight of them settling around her throat. Beneath where the pearls had rested, the note was gone. She had taken it out months ago. It lived now in the small drawer of her writing desk, because she had decided it was not a thing to be hidden under other things. It was simply a thing that had happened, and that had led to other things, and it deserved to be treated accordingly. She closed the jewelry box. She stood. Agnes appeared in the doorway with Clara's evening wrap and the expression of someone about to make a comment. "Don't," Clara said pleasantly. "I wasn't going to say anything," Agnes said, which was not true, and both of them knew it. "You were thinking loudly," Clara said. Agnes draped the wrap around her shoulders with the dignity of a woman who had learned to express her opinions through the precision of her work. "The Duke is downstairs," she said. "He arrived 20 minutes early." Clara stilled. "He's in the sitting room with Lord Voss," Agnes continued. "They appear to be getting along very well." There was laughter. Clara looked at herself in the mirror one last time. "Thank you, Agnes," she said. She went downstairs. She heard them before she reached the bottom, her father's voice, lighter than it had been in years, and James's lower one, and then something that resolved into a shared laugh, easy and unguarded, the sound of two people who had found, somewhat to everyone's surprise, that they genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Lord Voss had recovered considerably over the past year. This was the thing Clara had not let herself hope for, because hope had seemed, for a long time, like a luxury she couldn't afford. But he had recovered not to what he had been before, exactly, because some things reshaped you, and you became something different rather than returning to what you were, but to something good. He read in the afternoons. He had reconnected with old friends who had not, as it turned out, abandoned him so completely as he'd believed. Some of them had simply been waiting for a signal that it was all right to return. He laughed more. He had recently begun corresponding with an old colleague about a small investment, the first financial venture he'd considered in years, and he discussed it with a cautious optimism that Clara found almost unbearable in the best possible way. He had also, she suspected, been providing James with a significant amount of information about her that she had not authorized. She had decided to be at peace with this. She pushed open the sitting room door. Her father looked up first, and his face did the thing it did now when he looked at her, the thing she was also still getting used to. Not worry, not the complicated weighted sorrow of the years before, simply gladness. The uncomplicated gladness of a man who had watched things go very wrong for a very long time and was now watching them go right. James stood. He always stood when she entered a room, which was courtesy, but he also always looked at her in a specific way when she entered a room, which was not courtesy so much as something else that she had given up trying to catalog and had simply started accepting. "You're early," she said. "I'm aware," he said. 20 minutes. "I was given to understand," he said, with a gravity that did not entirely conceal something beneath it, "that you are sometimes ready before the appointed time." Clara looked at Agnes, who had appeared silently in the doorway with the expression of complete innocence. "Agnes," Clara said. "The carriage is ready whenever you are," Agnes said and disappeared. Lord Voss made a sound that was possibly a cough. Clara looked at James. He was watching her with that expression, the one she had named, the one she recognized now as easily as she recognized her own face in the mirror. The one that still, after a year of seeing it regularly, did something inconvenient to her composure. "You look," he started. "Don't," she said. "I was going to say well," he said. "You were not," she said. He almost smiled. "Shall we?" he said and offered his arm. Clara took it. The ball was at Harwick House, Lord Harwick, James's old friend, whose wife had taken a particular interest in Clara that Clara found both touching and slightly alarming, because Lady Harwick was the kind of woman who made things happen and did not always consult the people she was making things happen for. The carriage ride was familiar now in the way of things that had been repeated enough to become comfortable. James talked about something that had happened at his club, a story involving a misunderstanding about a horse and a minor lord who deserved it, and Clara listened and asked questions and laughed at the right moments and some wrong ones. And it was, she thought, the most ordinary and unremarkable thing, two people in a carriage talking about nothing in particular, and also one of the best things. She had discovered over the past year that she liked him. This sounds simple. It was not simple. She had expected, had perhaps even prepared herself for something more fraught, for the weight of history to sit heavily on everything, for the complicated mathematics of what his family had done and what he had tried to repair to complicate each moment. And it was there, sometimes, in quieter moments. Not between them precisely, but present the way the past is always present. She had decided this was all right. The past was allowed to be present. It did not have to govern. What she had not expected was how much she simply liked him. His particular humor, dry and sometimes dark, and occasionally directed at himself with a ruthlessness that she respected. His patience, which was considerable and which she had tested without entirely meaning to. The way he listened, which she had noticed on that very first evening in the sitting room, the way he listened in order to understand rather than to respond. The fact that he had opinions about things and said them directly, which she valued above almost any other quality in a person, because she had spent too many years in rooms where no one said what they meant. The fact that he had stood on the wrong side of her door for an unreasonable amount of time because he had run out of the kind of pride that prevented asking. She liked him very much. She suspected he knew this. She had told him once, quite directly, in the way she did things now. He had been so uncharacteristically undone by it that she had thought about it for days afterward with a satisfaction she was not entirely proud of. Harwick House was full. Clara walked in on James's arm and noticed, with the particular noticing of someone who remembered very clearly what it had felt like before, that the room received her differently now, not universally warmly. There were still women who angled away, still the occasional calculated unseeing. These things did not disappear because one's circumstances changed. What changed was how much weight they carried. They carried almost none. She found she was looking at the room with genuine interest, at the people in it, the conversations, the elaborate social machinery of it, without the underlying vigilance that had once exhausted her. She was not cataloging threats. She was not calculating positions. She was simply in a room, at a ball, with a person she had chosen to be there with. It was, she thought, remarkable how much energy became available when one stopped spending it on surviving. Mrs. Hale found her within the first quarter hour. "Miss Voss," she said, with the warm precision she brought to everything. "Mrs. Hale," Clara said. They looked at each other. Mrs. Hale's sharp eyes moved over Clara with the thoroughness Clara had come to expect, taking inventory in the way of a woman who paid attention to things and drew accurate conclusions. "You look very well," Mrs. Hale said. "I am very well," Clara said, which was true and which she had learned to say without qualification, without the reflexive minimizing she had once added to such statements. Simply, "I am very well." Mrs. Hale smiled. It was the real smile, not the socially efficient one, but the one underneath it. "Good," she said. "I am glad." She paused. "I want you to know I should have told him sooner, about his father, about your family. I have thought about it a great deal." "I know," Clara said. "I told myself I had reasons." "You did have reasons," Clara said, They simply stopped being sufficient. Mrs. Hale looked at her. "You are remarkably sensible," she said, in a tone that suggested sensible was the highest compliment she had available. "I have had a great deal of practice," Clara said. Mrs. Hale laughed genuinely, which Clara had come to treasure because it was not a common sound from her. Then she was absorbed back into the room, and Clara turned to find James beside her with 2 glasses and the expression of a man who had watched the exchange and found it interesting. "She likes you," he said. "I know," Clara said, taking the glass. "She doesn't like most people." "I know that too," Clara said. Later, past the dinner, past the dancing, which Clara had not expected to enjoy and had enjoyed considerably, they found themselves in a quieter corner of the room. Not deliberately. The evening had simply moved them there, the way evenings sometimes do, as if the room itself had an opinion about where certain people should end up. Lady Harwick appeared from somewhere with the purposeful energy of a woman who has been circling. "Miss Voss," she said, taking Clara's hand with both of hers, "I must ask, and you must forgive me, I am constitutionally incapable of not asking, are you enjoying yourself?" "Very much," Clara said. "And London, are you finding London more agreeable lately?" "Lady Harwick," Clara said pleasantly, "you are asking me something else entirely." Lady Harwick beamed. "I am simply making conversation." "You are making several conversations simultaneously," Clara said. Lady Harwick looked at James. "I like her enormously," she said. "I have always liked her." "You met her 4 months ago," James said. "I have always liked her in principle," Lady Harwick said with great dignity and went away. Clara looked at her glass. James looked at Clara. "She means well," he said. "I know," Clara said. "So does everyone who has asked me some version of that question this evening." James was quiet for a moment. "How many versions," he said, "have there been?" "7," Clara said, though the last one was Mrs. Hale, who had the decency to be direct about it. James was quiet. "And what," he said carefully, "did you say to the 7 versions?" Clara looked at him. The room moved around them. Music and voices, and the particular hum of a room full of people engaged in the business of their own lives. She thought about a road in November, and a note in a jewelry box, and a door that she had stood on the wrong side of for a long time before deciding to open it. "I said," Clara said, "that I had not been asked the question directly." Silence. James looked at her. She looked back. "Clara," he said. "James," she said. "I am going to ask you something," he said, "and I want you to answer honestly, not correctly." She almost smiled. He had borrowed her own words. She had said that to him in the sitting room the evening he had come to her door. She had not thought he'd kept them. She should have known better by now. "Yes," she said. He looked at her steadily. The room existed somewhere behind him, irrelevant. "Will you marry me?" he said. Not a performance. Not a declaration with an audience. Simply a question offered directly, one person to another, in a quiet corner of a room where no one was particularly watching. Clara looked at him. She thought about what she had said to her father a year ago in the kitchen with the cold tea. "I think I would like to be happy now." She thought about how she had not known, saying it, whether that was something she would be allowed. Whether happiness was a thing that could be decided upon, simply, and then enacted. She had found over the past year that it was. Not simply nothing was entirely simple, she had no illusions about that. Not without its complicated moments, its weight of history, its adjustments, but as a general direction, as an orientation, as a thing one decided and then worked toward every day with intention. "Yes," she said. Just that. One word simply given, no qualifications attached. Something happened in his face, and there it was again, that expression, the one she had named a year ago, the one that still undid her slightly and that she had entirely stopped trying to prevent. He looked at her as if she were the most unexpected thing he had ever encountered, which she suspected she was, and she looked back at him as if he were the same, which he was. "Yes," he said, as if repeating it to make it real. "Yes," she confirmed. He looked down at his glass for a moment. Then he looked back at her with something that was quietly and completely joy, which was not an expression she had associated with him in the beginning and which had become, over the course of a year, her favorite thing she knew how to find. "I have a ring," he said. "It's at home. I had intended to. This was not James," she said. He stopped. "It doesn't matter," she said. "I already said yes." He looked at her. "You said yes before the ring," he said. "I said yes to you," she said. "The ring is separate." He was quiet for a moment. "You are remarkably practical," he said. "I have had a great deal of practice," she said, which was the same thing she had said to Mrs. Hale, and she saw him hear the echo of it, and the corner of his mouth moved. "Shall we go home?" he said. Home. He said it simply, without weight, meaning her house, her father's house, her house. The place with the kitchen table and the worn sitting room chairs and the thin walls through which her father heard everything. She had not thought about what that word would feel like aimed at that place from this person. It felt like exactly the right word. "Yes," she said, "let's go home." Lord Voss was still awake when they arrived. He was in the kitchen, of course he was in the kitchen, with a book he was not reading and a cup of tea he had made an hour ago and not drunk. He looked up when they came in, and he took one look at his daughter's face, and he set down the book. He looked at James. James looked at him. "Sir," James said, "I have asked your daughter to marry me." "Has she answered you?" Lord Voss said. "She has," James said. Lord Voss looked at Clara. Clara looked at her father, at the face that had carried so much for so long, that had been sorry for so long, that had been rebuilding itself for a year with the careful determination of a man who had decided it was not too late to try. His eyes were bright. "Well," he said. "Well," Clara said. Lord Voss stood. He came around the table. He looked at James for a moment with the expression of a man taking the measure of another man one final time. Then he put out his hand. James took it. Lord Voss held it for a moment, and something passed between them. The particular wordless communication of two people who understood each other's position, and had decided, separately, to respect it. Then Lord Voss turned to Clara. He put his hand against her face, briefly, the way he had when she was small and the world had been entirely different. "Your mother," he said, "would have liked him very much." Clara covered his hand with hers. "I know," she said. Later, after Lord Voss had gone to bed and James had gone home with the promise of returning in the morning, early, he said, and she said how early, and he said unreasonably, and she said good. Clara sat at the kitchen table alone. The house was quiet. She sat with a cup of tea she was actually drinking, warm and ordinary, and she looked at the kitchen, the table where she had done the accounts every Friday for 3 years, the window where the morning light came in at a particular angle, the chair where her father sat, the room where she had learned to cook and to manage and to be sufficient. She thought about the road. She thought about the rain. She thought about a coat around her shoulders, warm and unexpected, placed there by a man who hadn't asked for her name and hadn't needed to, who had simply done the thing and gone. She thought about a note in a jewelry box, kept and unread for 3 weeks, then read 17 times, then moved to a desk drawer because it deserved to be somewhere a person could find it without hiding. She thought about a door and the sound of a voice on the other side of it. I have run out of the kind of pride that prevents asking. She thought about all the things she had said yes to, and all the things she had said yes to by not saying no, and all the things she had, slowly, over the course of a year, learned to simply want without apology. She was 24 years old. She felt for the first time in a very long time exactly her age. She finished her tea. She put the cup in the basin. She went upstairs. She passed the dressing table without stopping. There was nothing she needed from it tonight, nothing to consult or to hold or to decide, and she got into bed and she lay in the dark and she breathed. She was going to be happy. She had decided. And Clara Voss, as anyone who knew her could confirm, was not a woman who made a decision and then failed to enact it. In the spring, they married quietly, with Lord Voss and Mrs. Hale and the Harwicks and Agnes in attendance, Agnes having made it entirely clear that her attendance was not optional. The dress was the color Clara had always worn in her own imagination, not blue, not the green of her mother's altered gown, something between. A color she had not had a word for until she saw it, and then it was simply right. Lord Voss danced at the wedding. He had not danced in 11 years. Agnes cried, which she denied. Mrs. Hale did not cry. She stood at the edge of the room with a glass of champagne and watched her nephew look at his wife and felt, with great satisfaction, that she had made the right decision in telling him the truth when she did. She had made it a little late, but not, it turned out, too late. That was the thing about certain people, she thought. You could not ruin them. You could set them in the rain on a dark road with nothing, and they would walk, and they would arrive. Clara had always been going to arrive. She had simply needed someone willing to stop. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.